All right, so we have some big updates on the highly debated $5,000 DOGE dividend check, which some people have even called a stimulus check. And since our last video here, there are a couple of updates I want to share with you, and discussion around this proposal is getting even bigger, right? So a lot of you have been asking, is this real? Is this just another empty promise? Is this actually happening? How is this going to work? Who qualifies? Most importantly, does this plan actually have a chance of happening? So stick around, because in this video, we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know, what we know so far, what's changed, what's still uncertain, what you need to understand and watch out for as it relates to this. So just to again remind you here, what is the $5,000 DOGE dividend check? It is a proposal that was introduced by James Fishback and has been backed by Elon Musk. And this idea is simple. So returning government savings to taxpayers through a one-time $5,000 refund per eligible recipient. But here is where it differs from the past stimulus checks that we received, right? So this has nothing to do with no government spending is going to be involved with this. So unlike previous stimulus checks, this plan claims it would be funded entirely by cutting wasteful government spending rather than adding to the deficit that we currently have. It's going to focus on savings. So the initial goal was to cut 2 trillion in spending, with 400 billion, that's 20%, going to taxpayers. And even though it does sound promising, I want to get into the details and the latest updates as it relates to this. All right. So a couple key updates and changes that you need to be aware of. So Elon Musk adjust the savings goal originally. So the plan aimed to cut 2 trillion in spending, but Musk has since lowered his expectations, and now he's saying it's just going to be 1 trillion. Cut is going to be a little bit more realistic. So that means the total available refunds could be significantly lower than originally expected. So how much has been saved so far? So the DOGE team claims they've identified 15 billion in budget cuts, grant eliminations, and reductions in government programs. However, people who are fact checkers are pretty skeptical about this, and they're pointing out that some of these so-called savings were already planned cuts, and these are not necessarily new reductions. So the bottom line is the actual amount available for refunds is still unclear. So let's talk about who actually qualifies for this and who's going to be able to have access to this if they actually put this out there, right? So some early speculation suggested that only those earning $440,000 per year would qualify, but that's false. All right. So the updated proposal includes Social Security recipients. It's also going to include veteran affairs beneficiaries, also going to include anyone who files a federal income tax return. And that's huge because it means retirees and veterans who were left out originally of the past stimulus payments would now be eligible for this. All right. So that is good news. So there's going to be some new incentives added as well. So the proposal now includes tax exemptions on overtime pay and tips to be able to encourage workforce participation. So the biggest challenge as it relates to this is getting Congress on board, right? So even if the savings are real and if the refund can actually be funded, there's still one major obstacle, and that's going to be Congress. So House Speaker Mike Johnson and other physical conservatives argue that any government savings should go towards reducing the national debt, and that's sending it directly as payments to taxpayers. That's what they're debating right now. So lawmakers are also warning that injecting billions into the economy could drive up inflation even further, even if this wasn't technically a new type of spending or government spending. And people who are in support of this argue that since this is a tax refund and not a new government spending, it wouldn't have the same inflationary impact. But here's the issue, right? There's no clear data yet on how people would spend this money, right? So the question becomes, would they pay off the debt or increase the spending? So the answer still remains unknown. So where do things stand right now? So right now, James Fishback and his team have been meeting with lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and they're trying to build support for the DOGE dividend. But here's the reality of it. Right now, as we know of it, there's no official bill that has been introduced into Congress. There's no clear timeline for when or if this is actually going to happen. There are some reports that suggest it could be included in a future budget reconciliation package, but there is no concrete evidence of that yet. So the big question is, Will this actually happen? So right now, the Doge dividend is still just a proposal. It does have some big name supporters, but it still has a long way to go to be able to actually become a law and actually be put in place. But until then, the official bill, confirmed savings, congressional approval, this is not something that you can count on just yet, right? So let me know what you think. All right. So just to recap and remind you a couple of things that we just talked about here. So we covered up uh breaking down the $5,000 Doge dividend proposal, what it is, where it comes from, and why it's generating so much buzz. And like I said, unlike past stimulus checks, this plan is based on cutting government spending rather than increasing the deficit. The original goal was to save 2 trillion with 400 billion set aside for taxpayers as a refund, but that number has since been revised down to a more realistic 1 trillion in cuts. It probably honestly may get lower again, meaning that the payout amount could actually be lower than expected. We then also covered how much has been saved so far. Doge claims that 15 billion has already been cut, but fact checkers argue that some of these reductions were already planned and may not actually create new savings. And while the idea is promising, there's still uncertainty about how much money is really available. We also talked about who actually qualifies for the refund. So there were some earlier rumors suggested that only applied to high income earners, which turned out to be false. So the latest update as it relates to this confirms that Social Security recipients, veterans, and anyone who files a federal tax return would be eligible. And that is a big deal, right? Especially for people who are retirees and veterans who were left out of previous stimulus programs. Then we also talked and looked at the biggest roadblock, which is Congress right now. So, as I mentioned, some lawmakers are, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, believe that any government savings should go towards reducing the national debt instead of handing out refunds. Others warn that injecting billions into the economy, even as a tax refund, could lead to more inflation. So, supporters argue that since this is returning tax money and not printing money, the inflation risk is lower. But there's still no clear data yet to prove whether this would help or hurt the economy. And last but not least, we finally discussed where things stand right now. There's no final bill that's been introduced in Congress. There's no clear timeline for when or if this is going to happen and whether this is going to move forward. And some reports suggest that it could actually be included in a future budget reconciliation package. There's no concrete evidence of this happening yet. So now the big question is, what do you think, right? What do you think? Do you think that we should be able to get these refund checks? How should they be used? Should it be given towards the taxpayer? Should it be put down towards the national debt? Should the government prioritize this at all? Would getting a one-time $5,000 check help you and your family? Or do you think it's just important to go ahead and pay down the national debt? So let me know your thoughts below. Again, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to be able to stay up to date on the latest and greatest as it relates to this. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.